Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sustainable Pixel Podcast. So in this episode, I'll be talking about the Olympics, and joining me today is my friend Vivian.
Hi.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Now, to get us started, I wanted to ask, what are your general thoughts about the Olympics? Do you normally watch them? Do you like the idea of them?
This is like embarrassing to say. I watch them if there's like a dude that I think is super hot. But like, I'm not in it for the sports. I don't even watch the basketball stuff, which is what I would usually watch if I were watching sports.
Yeah, but the basketball is pretty bad for the Olympics, though, so that makes sense.
It is, but like it's nice to watch like Draymond get another gold medal, you know?
Yeah.
I remember like he said once, like someone asked him, what do you like more, having a ring or having a gold medal? And he was like, my answer is gonna be super unpatriotic, so I'm not gonna answer it. So I think that pretty much sums up how I feel about the Olympics.
I actually did not expect that to be your answer. Oh, that's great. You know, I'm not gonna lie, that's probably the reason why I started watching the Olympics in the first place too. I feel like my first memory of watching the Olympics when they were live was when I saw a 14-year-old Tom Daley.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know exactly the moment you're talking about.
Adorable Tom Daley.
Yeah, I remember he was a really big deal back then because he was like one of the youngest people on their diving team. So he got a lot of attention too.
He did. And he was good.
Yeah, he's in general a very good athlete.
Yeah, for sure. And look at him now. He's still doing great. So good for him. Props to you, Tom Daley, if you're listening. Probably not, though. But yeah, so I wanted to talk about the Olympics because you actually sent me a video about the shanty town in Seoul called Guryeong Village. I hope I'm pronouncing that okay. I know it's not right. But this is in Seoul, and it was a direct result of the rapid development in Seoul in leading up to the Summer Olympics, because people were getting evicted left and right to prepare for this event. And the Seoul Olympics were there in 1988, and it's currently 2020. So it's been there. This shanty town has been there for over 30 years. So it's insane that this even exists. And this shanty town is huge. It's the size of 53 football fields. And all these houses are like made of plywood and tarp. And the conditions, like in the video, said that, like, you know, after 30 years, you need proper like regulation and just upkeep of just anything, like even like a regular building. And this is not like, it's not made of concrete or anything. So it's definitely needs a lot more TLC to it. And the ironic part about this shantytown is right across the street from the very expensive Gangnam district in Seoul. And just like seeing the impact of the Olympics on the actual city that it hosts is very negative. I don't know if you have other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an understatement. The video was from, I think, Bloomberg or something, and they were basically going around interviewing all the residents of the shantytown. They were saying that most of the folks living there are at least 60. A lot of people were probably destitute when they moved there 30 years ago. So a lot of people, you know, they were kind of down on their luck when they were in their 40s, and now they're in their 70s and they're still living there. And it is what it is, right? Like, it's a shanty town. It's not developed, you know, like there's no like modern plumbing. The houses are made of tarp, so in the summer it's really hot, and in the winter it's really cold. And you know, Korea doesn't have a strong social welfare system, so you know, like there's no social security for the elderly. And so there's really nothing for these folks to do. And so the point of the video was saying the government wants to take that land back and redevelop it. But there's some sort of dispute between the tenants association in the shantytown and the government and whatever developer they had found to do it. And so basically the issue now is like they're not getting compensated for what they should be for that. And so, you know, I think this is a unfortunately a very common story that happens, not just like in regards to the Olympics, but to redevelopment in general. Like
Mhm,
this just happens. Like you have this beautiful piece of land next to Gangnam,
mhm,
which is one of the most expensive boroughs, I guess, like in the world, right? And so
mhm,
I'm sure developers and the Seoul municipal government would love to get their hands on it. And unfortunately, whenever these things happen, public housing doesn't really occur, right? They'll tell
mhm.
you they're going to build public housing with the land, but then when it gets down to it, it never happens.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, definitely. I think even in the video it said, like, oh, they plan to make the affordable housing for them starting 2022, and I'm like, "Okay, so they're gonna live here for another over a year or so, or 2 years?" And, the conditions are still bad now, and with all of this, it also reminds me of just how bad capitalism is and just how events like the Olympics, made as something, like, nice and glamorous, and then it perpetuates all these different social issues of economic inequality. What is the solution to it? Like, what can be done to solve it? And then there's so many disputes that happen because, yeah, like you said, like there were some issues with the company that is supposed to be developing this affordable housing, and then like the residents themselves, like they have their own ideas of solutions, but it's different than what the government wants.
Yeah.
I was like, "Any thoughts?" But also with this shantytown, like, not a lot of people, or well, actually, I guess I don't know too much about Seoul and just South Korea in general, but I feel like it's just not very mainstream that this is known. Like, even leading up to the Rio 2016 Olympics, I didn't realize that there were a ton of, like, shantytowns there either, and, in the lead up of that, like, the city itself tried very hard to even hide that these existed in all their marketing and everything.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're going to bid to bring like global business to your city, you're not going to say, "Hey, look, we like kicked out a bunch of poor people so that you rich people who can afford plane tickets and hotel fees to come and like watch people play sports." So,
Uh, yeah. I feel like with the Olympics, it's just so an elitist thing. It's like, yeah, like people who can afford to come and fly and and stay here and take 2 weeks off or whatever to watch the games. Like those are really the only people that really can go to the Olympics, especially like when cities kind of justify like hosting the Olympics. They're like, oh, it'll bring a lot of tourism and revenue and all this stuff. I was like, well, is it? It's so expensive. And just hosting the Olympics, right? Like it costs a lot for the city in like more ways than just like money, right? Like it costs people, right? Displacing people, and then also like the cost of putting it on is just astronomical. For Rio in 2016, they spent $13.1 billion, which is actually surprisingly less than in London when they spent 14.8. But then there goes China, who spent a whopping $45 billion on the 2008 Olympics. So I'm just kind of like, this feels like honestly a colossal waste of money to just be spending on one short term event.
yeah, and it also feels like a waste of resources too,
Hmm.
right? Like you're building an entire stadium, and it's not that I like support stadium building necessarily, but if you're gonna build a stadium, it should be usable for other events in the future.
Hmm.
And I'm not privy to like how often the bird's nest in Beijing is used. But if you're gonna build that, right, like is it just there for that one time? And your podcast is about sustainability, right? And so like how can you make something sustainable? Like the Seoul arena, I know like BTS performs there. I don't know who else performs there.
Yeah, because it's
So
massive.
yeah, and like here, right? Like if you have a stadium, only people like Taylor Swift or Beyonce are playing those venues, right? They're not
Hmm.
accessible to most artists. So like what is the purpose of it?
Hmm.
And how can you make it last?
Yeah, and the thing with the bird's nest is that it's not actually used that much. And while that particular venue does a lot better than other Olympic venues in terms of revenue, a lot of stadiums that were built for the Olympics are abandoned now. And that's a really common trend with most of the cities that host because they don't find a use for it after the Olympics end.
When I was a kid, I didn't realize that that's what it meant when you bid for the Olympics. I thought you just held the Olympics in your city. I didn't know that you built a stadium and then never use it again.
Yeah, you need like a bunch of stadiums of all different kinds too, which is wild. I'm just like, what kind of city even has like such a diverse amount of stadiums that are also large enough to hold multiple games and events like all at once? Like that's crazy. You can't already have that, so you have to build it. And then there's the part where you have to house the freaking athletes. And that's actually one of the issues that happened to Vancouver when they hosted the Winter Olympics. So they built all this housing, and then their intent was actually to sell the apartments after the Olympics. But they're not cheap. They were like over $1 million. And then I don't think that they actually ever sold all of the apartments. And so the city itself is just like in debt from even building all of this.
It truly makes me wonder why cities still bid for the Olympics. Seeing like the history of this, how it has basically bankrupted a bunch of cities. Like I don't understand why cities would still bid for it. I know LA is currently in the running for it, and I'm like, LA is the last city that should be like exacerbating its housing crisis. Like it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. It's like insane how like tied together the Olympics and housing crisis is because building all this new infrastructure, it really doesn't help anyone because they're going to mark up the price. And you have to know that people are actually going to be able to afford it. And then when people can't afford it, then you inevitably have a housing crisis. Like, I just don't understand, like, people who are in government or who, like, actually, I'm not too sure, like, because the city itself, like, which I'm assuming is like city government, is the one that puts in the bid. So I'm just kind of like, you have to have a like planning department. Like they have to see that this is a terrible idea. And I do think that it is getting harder like to even get cities to make a bid. John Oliver had a segment on his Last Week Tonight show that said that there were so many cities that dropped out of putting in the bid for the Winter Olympics in 2022 that even like Norway dropped out, and then the only options that were left at the time were Beijing and Kazakhstan was this country, I think. But basically, though, it was like two cities that honestly like were not really equipped to host the Winter Olympics because it honestly wasn't very cold in either of them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about the history of the Olympics, it really only started in like the 20s, right? It's a fairly new global phenomenon.
I think the first modern Olympic Games was at the tail end of the 1800s. It was 1896.
Okay, so it started in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Mhm, yeah.
And so if you think about it back then, cities were nothing like they are now. And they had a lot more land to develop. They had fewer residents. Globally, our population was much lower, um, all that stuff. And so I think if it were like 1950, like we're coming out of World War II, everything is like destroyed. You actually have the land, and I think you have more of an incentive to bid for something like that, right? Because it'll bring business to like a war torn land. But now, if you think about like LA, which has been very developed in the past 100 years, right? And so it doesn't make sense for them to do it from a planning slash housing perspective.
Mhm.
But I think if you look back to see how maybe in the past the Olympics have brought business to the city, then maybe those city officials are thinking like, well, it worked in the past, so it might work now. And so I think
Mhm.
it's that tension between housing, land, and also like business minded people, and
Mhm.
like something's not going through.
I think that was the other issue. I read with Athens, like they had chosen to host the Olympics because one, like they hadn't hosted the Olympics since the very first one of the modern Olympics. And then they also wanted to use like the Olympics to basically upgrade infrastructure in the city. And they wanted to, I guess, modernize them. I don't know if that was the right word, but basically they wanted to revitalize the city of Athens. But unfortunately, like after the Olympic Games, 21 out of 22 of their Olympic venues are abandoned now. So they didn't even have a plan to actually keep using any of the venues that they created. So there's a disconnect, right? Like you want to have this big Olympic event to bring in revenue, to bring all this attention, but then you also need a long-term plan.
Well, I think that's the thing. Is like the Olympics are not a long term plan. Like there's no way you can have a long term plan and do the Olympics. Not in a modern, like current, like contemporary sense. Like maybe 50 years ago that would have been possible while you were still building your city, but you can't do it now because now you're just going to kick out all the poor people and then build a stadium that no one uses.
So I guess that begs the question of what does that mean for the future? Because the Olympics industry is pretty large. There are a lot of athletes, there are a lot of people aspiring to be Olympic athletes, and the International Olympic Committee has a large operating budget, right? And they have a lot of influence because they do contribute some of their budget to support athletes and encourage youth to be Olympians. But then you kind of think about whether that is actually a thing to advocate for, because also being an athlete's really hard and it uses a lot of resources. So you just think, like, does this make sense to put resources in this avenue? And also thinking about the Tokyo Olympics, it has currently been postponed to the summer of 2021 due to the pandemic. And that's pretty hard too, as an athlete, to maintain your physical health for another year in order to still want to compete in these games. And I did want to note too that back in September of 2020, the vice president of the International Olympic Committee said the Olympics are still going to happen in 2021 with or without COVID.
That is the that is those are the words of a crazy person.
You
I
tell him.
I am literally in shock.
I mean, this was said in September, so maybe he was just like, "It's just gonna happen." Like, I think he was also quoted saying something like, "Oh, like these games will be like it'll conquer COVID or whatever." I don't know, like, or not conquer. You know what I mean?
Those are the words of a crazy person. I think there are several things at play, right? Like one is, I think increasingly people both like the cities and like just like people in general are realizing that the Olympics are just not a sustainable thing. And I think with how the environmental movement like globally is happening right now, like I find that I'm assuming more and more young people are not going to be into the Olympics moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's so bad for the environment. Like that's also not a thing we've
Mm-hmm.
touched on like at all. Like it's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so like even just like the building of the stadiums, like let's forget everything else. Like that in itself is so not sustainable that I think increasingly like culturally young people are not going to like it.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other side, I think culturally it's also really the only way that the entire world can get together in a non-violent, like just very fun, peaceful way,
Mm-hmm.
that also brings honor to your country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something you can just undo. And it's something that, considering everything that's happening, like the US pulling out of all these agreements, all that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it's like the one thing that holds people together at this point. And it's unfortunate that this is the thing that holds people together.
Yeah, no, it's like interesting that you bring that up because, well, one, I have also been hearing that a lot of countries really want to host the Olympics because they want to encourage more young people to get into like sports and to, spur on more of a culture of athleticism so that they can like eventually get on the national team or something. Um, so I guess that's also like a goal, but I didn't think about how young people probably wouldn't even want to do it though because of like the insane environmental impact of even this event and just the existence of this industry. So I don't know, like I would hope that people think about that, but then I mean, it's also something like fun. So I feel like I'm not sure if the interest in it is decreasing because I also feel like a lot of my own friends are very into sports and also very into like friends and also like classmates and coworkers in the past. Like in 2016, like that summer, my coworkers and I, all we did was we would be working, but we literally would also have an extra monitor on with the Olympics. Like, and some of us, we would bring like our extra tablets or whatnot, or maybe we'd be watching it on our phone if we wanted to watch a different event. Like, we would just have that on, and it was just like something fun for us to like do together. And it was kind of also like a bonding moment for us because we didn't even know each other that well. But I don't know. It's like, well, if this brings us together, but then at the same time, like, there's also a lot of politics that we're also ignoring when we kind of do these events, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Olympics are magic, right? Like, there's something about the Olympics that every 4 years, like, I suddenly become like this expert in like these random sports, right? For like that brief 4 weeks. I'm like so into it and like I know everything about it and it's all anyone ever talks about.
Mhm.
And there's nothing that really replaces that, right? And so I think you think about like athletes like Chloe Kim.
Mm.
Like I really like her, right? And like she's great, and I want to see someone like her succeed, and I think she deserves her medals, and I don't
Mhm.
want to like take the Olympics away from her. And so it's kind of like nothing is ever 100% good or 100% bad.
Yeah.
And so within everything, there's always something good and very bad. And so I think it's up to people to decide for themselves how much they want to support something and how much they don't. And in the specific example of the Olympics, I don't think that we have a choice whether or not we want to support it or not, right? Because it's going to happen whether or not we like it, unless there are like global like protests like against the Olympics. I don't think they'll be canceled anytime
Ooh,
soon.
okay, so are we starting that, or are you trying to incite
No,
global
no, no,
protest?
no. I am no. I am in no position to do so. I'm just saying, like, unless that happens, and even then, I don't think the Olympics would be that beholden to
True.
the protests. They would still
Mhm.
happen. And so, like, now I think for me, like, the question is there a way to have the Olympics that is less bad? Like, can they just have them in their existing stadiums and have it over a longer period of time? I know that's more difficult for the athletes, and I don't know if that's the right solution. There are national contests all the time. Like, people compete all the time. It's not like it doesn't happen. It's just that it's not a big event. It's only like the real fans who go.
Yeah. I've seen things of people also arguing like, "Oh, it can't be in the same city every year because it's bad for the city." And I was like, "Okay, well, clearly, if everyone knows that it's bad for the city, maybe we shouldn't like do this anymore." But then it's also like we've had so many Olympic Games already, so it's like, well, yeah, let's just go back to the cities that already have the infrastructure and have all of that in place. I guess it would be kind of hard for the ones that hosted a while ago and those buildings maybe got converted to something else. So that would be hard if those don't exist anymore. But there definitely needs to be some changes in terms of making this way less wasteful. Because I looked up how much waste was produced from the Rio Games, and it's freaking 17,000 tons of waste. I was like, that is a lot of garbage because odds are too, like a lot of it was just garbage and like nothing's really being recycled or, you know, disposed of in a responsible manner. Also, like everyone's flying in to
Jet
all these
fuel,
places.
jet
Yeah.
fuel.
Fuel is the absolute worst, and, like, I love traveling, I like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not like, "Don't ever go on a plane," because traveling t it's great because it also makes people or not makes people less ignorant, but you'll get to learn it like, about another city, about another place, you get to see it and feel, like, the culture in that place, and I think that's good for everyone to do that. But, like, with this event, there's millions of people coming into this one city, and they're flying in, and there's also what was it? I think it was Katie Ledecky in 2012. Great person. She was a child at the time. I think she was like 14 or 15 when she was in the 2012 Olympics. And so she was still in high school. She won a gold medal, flew home, and then flew back. Like, she flew home so she could celebrate with her friends and see them, and then flew back to the Olympic Games because she had more events to swim. And I was just like, the jet fuel.
Yeah. You can't blame someone for wanting to celebrate with their friends.
Exactly.
The only thing you can do is make the damage less impactful.
Yeah.
The bottom line is there's no way the Olympics are going away. So the only move forward is to find different ways where you can like take it in here and there.
When I was younger, I wanted to actually go to the Olympics in person. I even learned how the ticketing system works. You don't actually get to choose the event that you want to attend, like the sport. And so you just randomly get a ticket. But I only want to see like a handful of sports, and I don't even get to choose. And so I have to take that gamble. Or I guess like I buy more tickets in the hopes that I can actually see the event that I want. But I could also just be comfortably at my own home and watch it on TV. So why do I need to go to it in person? So like, we have that right now because it's always on TV. It's unfortunately only on one channel though, because somehow NBC bought the exclusive rights to it. So I don't know if you remember, like when we were kids, it was like on every channel. Like everyone could pay for rights to show a certain game or sport.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. The whole like NBC/Comcast like exclusive right to it only happened, I think, in like 2012.
I see.
That's the other thing too. The Olympics has very exclusive contracts with specific brands, and I'm just like, this is a monopoly.
I mean, to be clear, the Olympics is a purely capitalistic like endeavor. Like there's nothing about it that's not somehow tinged with like big business.
But that's kind of just how it developed though, right? Like now it's just so huge of an event that you can only have big businesses and industries that can invest in it. I mean, be sponsors.
Yeah, I think that's just the nature of it being a global event.
Circling back to what you said about LA. So LA right now is set to host the 2028 Olympics. And looking into it, I got a little confused too because I was like, is it LA the city? Is it LA County? Because LA City doesn't have like a ton of infrastructure. All of the infrastructure is all over the county. And so technically the city was the one that won the bid. But like you said, like this is the last place that the Olympics should go, and the last place that a housing crisis should even take place is LA.
Yeah, it's going to be so bad, and I don't even know how. I just imagine like it's just going to be like Dodger Stadium all over again, and they're just going to like pluck people out, just throw them away.
Wait, enlighten me. What do you mean by that?
Oh, Dodgers Stadium was developed on like a neighborhood called Chavez Ravine, and I think it was like mainly Spanish-speaking folks at the time. I don't know when Dodger Stadium was built. I'm assuming somewhere in the 1950s. Um, and so basically, it's the same story, right? Like they were told, the community was told it was going to go to public housing. A bunch of people sold the houses, sold the land, left. There were some holdouts, and then it became like the super like contentious thing where the holdouts didn't want to like leave, but the city/developers were like forcing them to leave. But they were told like, oh, it's going to go to public housing, and then they all left, and then they built Dodger Stadium.
Oh my gosh. Dude, this is like exactly what happened in Rio.
Yeah, it's all the same story, and again, it's a sports venue. Like it's not any different. But I'm assuming the same thing is going to happen, but in like a much worse situation because LA in the 50s was like not as developed as it is now, and nowadays like there are people who live in the neighboring counties who drive into LA every day, right, for the commute, and so there's no land. Like there's no land to do this on.
Yeah, no, really. It's like LA or just like Southern California in general, it just has so many people and everything is already taken up. Like, unless you want to keep going east, that's really the only place where the land is, but that's not even LA.
Yeah, and my issue with LA is that LA is all about sprawl, right? Like they love their like one-story houses where you can only have like a single family living in it. And they have so much land. Like if you had just built high rises, half of the issue would have been solved. But the folks in Southern California are really hesitant to
Hmm.
build high rises. And
Yeah.
so I yeah, I don't know.
I don't even think you need to build like a high rise. I think it's just like the idea of it, right? Because you could have a decent apartment complex or something, right? If it was like 2 or 3 stories, maybe up to five, right? It doesn't have to be like 100 stories or whatever people are imagining. They're just like, oh no, like that can't happen.
Yeah, ruin the character of this neighborhood.
Honestly, people are way too concerned with aesthetics. Because someone told me one time that there's this popular architect named Frank Lloyd Wright who designed all these 1 story houses in this particular neighborhood, and someone bought a house and wanted to redo it and add a second floor, and all the neighbors went nuts.
Oh yeah, HOAs, man, they are some gnarly folks.
I hate HOAs, but that's for another conversation.
But yeah, people are really just so worried about the aesthetics. If you keep worrying about the aesthetics, then the environmental impact will be significantly worse.
And I love the Olympics, but it's hard to support this type of event nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's just like life too. Like you just have to look at a thing and think, like what are the things that are good about it and what are the things that are bad about it, and can we improve the parts that are bad?
Mhm.
There's no point in me writing off the Olympics forever and being like, I hate the Olympics, I'm never watching them.
Mhm.
That won't do anything, right? Like the way to get people on board is to say, I also love the Olympics, but here are some like 10 changes I would like to make.
Mhm.
And it makes it a lot more palatable for people too.
I like this. This is a solution that is starting right here. I think it's really important for, like you said, like just in life, to evaluate when there is something that is clearly doing a lot of harm and seeing what are the possible changes, right? Because there are always changes that you can make that can reduce the impact and can make the entire situation a lot better. And I think that that is definitely a great lesson for the Olympics to take a note from so that they can, figure out their whole issue, but also just a lesson for life. Do you agree?
Sure. Yeah, Olympics committee.
Yeah, International Olympic Committee, give me a call. I can do the consulting. No, I'm just kidding. Well, actually, I can try though. Would you be down?
Sure, yeah, yeah. Hit me up.
Yeah. All right. Hit us both up.
Pay
Let
me,
us
pay me
know.
a high consulting fee, and I'm down.
Right? I was like, with your big old budget, apparently the International Olympic Committee takes 10% of their budget for like administrative stuff. And then the 90% of it is used to put on the games and also to just encourage more like athleticism around the world. And the amount of money that they allocate towards the cost of the event is $2 billion. That's split between the Winter Olympics, the Summer Olympics, and also the Youth Olympics. So I thought they had a lot of money, but I guess not as much as I thought, because clearly $2 billion is not enough to put on the Olympics.
It's really nothing.
Yeah, especially today. Like apparently they increased it a little bit more starting in 2008 or something. Or actually, I don't think they actually contributed that much to 2008 because I think China's figured out it financially somehow, even though it was like one of the most expensive games. But if they can allocate some money, I was like, I don't need 2 billion, but
I would love $2 billion. Olympic committee. Give me give me the money. Line my
yeah.
pockets.
No, I would 100% love 2 billion, but like they can spare something in the 2 billion and have a consulting fee for us.
Right. I'm
Yeah,
just, making sure that this event can run as long as possible.
as sustainably as possible.
Yes. And so therefore, give me $2 billion.
2 million or billion?
Billion. I mean, I'm okay with 2 million too.
Yeah, no, I'd be down for 2 million, but at the same time, I don't even know if I can get a house with that. Or like the house that I want.
Sad.
I know, but that's the world we live in. Housing crisis in California.
Mhm.
All right. Well, we came full circle, so it is time to wrap up. And I just wanted to say thank you to Vivian for being my second guest and coming onto the show to talk about the Olympics with me. I thought this conversation was pretty fun, so thanks for doing this episode. And here is an update for those of you who are wondering if the Tokyo Olympics are actually still going to happen. As of March 2021, the Tokyo Olympics are still scheduled to start in July after being postponed for 1 year due to the pandemic. And in more breaking news, it was just announced that overseas spectators are not allowed to attend any of the events of the Summer Games this year, and all events will have reduced capacity and many other safety protocols. Now, I'm not saying that we should have full capacity, and I'm a little hesitant that the games should even happen, but I do want to note that this is definitely going to have a huge economic impact on Japan, especially after the cost to postpone it and everything, so really good luck to the organizers. And if you are concerned about the impact of future games now after listening to this episode, particularly for the 2028 LA Olympics, and you are a sustainability professional with more than 10 years of experience, just this week I actually saw they are hiring for a sustainability senior manager for the 2028 Summer Olympics. So if you meet these requirements, I highly recommend for you to apply for this position to make sure that none of the bad things that Vivian and I talked about in this episode happen to LA. Now, if you've liked this episode, please subscribe to this podcast on the platform that you're listening to get notifications when I have new episodes out. And share this podcast with anyone that you think might like it. I am also on Instagram and have a Facebook page, so I would super appreciate a follow and a like. I am at Sustainable Pixel on Instagram, and on Facebook, go ahead and search the Sustainable Pixel podcast, and you should be able to find my page. So thank you so much, and I hope you all stay safe, continue social distancing, wash your hands, and make good choices. Bye now.